colleagues, I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 24 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. Pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, December 10th, 2025, and the motion adopted on Wednesday, December 10th, 2025, the committee shall resume consideration of Bill C-15, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on November 4th, 2025. I would like to welcome our Minister of Canadian Identity, Marc Miller, who is joined with his Deputy Minister, Francis Bilodeau, with the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Joël Montminy, Assistant Deputy Minister, Blair McMurrin, and the Chief Financial Officer, Véronique Côté. With that, Minister, you have 5 minutes of opening remarks. Please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. Nice to see all of you. I do want to begin by acknowledging the land we're on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Thank you for inviting me here today. In this time, as you all know, marked by uncertainty, changing economy, unprecedented challenges as a society, we know that more than ever, we need to protect our identity and stand together to confront these challenges. In his mandate letter, the Prime Minister set out our government's priorities for meeting this moment, defending our sovereignty, strengthening our country on the world stage, and creating a Canada that our children and grandchildren deserve. Dans le budget 2025, notre gouvernement
Budget 2025 confirms the government's commitment to protecting what makes Canada unique and brings Canadians together through continued investments in our official languages, our public institutions, and our natural and cultural heritage. I have the privilege of talking to you today about Bill C-15, which has many measures to support journalism and culture and our national identity.
However, we are proposing only one corrective measure directly through BIA, which is the reason for my appearance today. In 2023, Bills C-11, the Online Streaming Act, and C-13, the Modernization of the Official Languages Act, were considered around the same time and both sought to amend the same section of the Broadcasting Act. While in the Senate, Bill C-11 had a privacy provision added, which was later unintentionally overwritten when Bill C-13 was passed. The measure that we're proposing in the BIA simply corrects this error and restores Parliament's original intent. I don't assume that'll take up 50 minutes of discussion, but wanted to highlight it. Pour revenir au budget 2025, nous
fournissons. To come back to the 2025 budget, we are providing funding to have more impact in sports, industries, culture, arts, and of course, community celebrations. Canadian creators strengthen our economy by creating jobs and by stimulating innovation, which counts for the long term, and stimulating Canada's productivity on the world stage. The 2025 budget brings over $500,000 to grow the Canadian audiovisual sector, which is non-negligible. We aim to better support creators of Canadian content. And there's also a supplementary funding for the ONF, for the NFB.
$150 million for CBC Radio-Canada and over $46 million to support performing arts. The special measures for journalism component of the Canadian Periodical Fund will also be extended to support community news outlets and magazine publishers. Funding for the Sports Support Program will build on previous investments to advance diversity and gender equality in the Canadian sports system. Other items include funding for arts and heritage activities, increased support to help with hosting of FIFA Men's World Cup in 2026, as well as efforts to support the awareness of Indigenous cultures. Nous avons également annoncé un investissement de plus de 1,4 milliard de dollars dans l'enseignement.
We've also announced more than $1.4 billion towards minority language communities and learning of a second language. And we will be very closely collaborating with all territorial and provincial governments. Our official languages are not only a treasure for each and every one of us, they also open doors to international trade and cooperation between provinces and territories.
Pride by investing in the traditions that bring communities together. It provides $21 million for local festivals and events, as well as $20 million to support Canada Day celebrations across the country. Nous doublons également le financement annuel des
We're
célébrations.
also doubling our annual Acadian National Holiday funding. And since the Canada Strong Pass was such a success last year, we will be renewing that initiative.
26 to help families save as they discover and rediscover the incredible cultural and natural treasures that make our country so great. Our culture is vibrant, unique, and diverse, and it's the tie that binds us. It puts our shared values and national identity on display and serves as our calling card to the world. It reflects our strength, our confidence, and our inclusiveness, and it's what makes us and Canada truly exceptional. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Madam Chair. I look forward to answering your questions. Merci.
Great. Thank you so much, Minister Miller. We will begin with 6 minutes from Ms. Thomas. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Bill C-11, of course, as mentioned in your opening remarks, it was sold as not regulating user content. However, the CRTC has recently confirmed that it can, in fact, require algorithms to manipulate what Canadians see online, which ultimately would boil down to censorship if that were the case. It's exactly what Conservatives have warned about. It's exactly what Canadians have been very much concerned by. And so I'm just curious as to what you make of this then, now that the CRTC is willing to admit that they can, in fact, compel algorithms.
Well, this is first and foremost, Ms. Thomas, an issue when it comes to the ongoing work that the CRTC is doing in making sure that we are properly regulating platforms and specifically what the CRTC is currently seized with, which is making sure that people are providing Canadian content. This isn't about free speech. It isn't about telling people what to do. It's about making sure that we have a thriving broadcasting and a modern broadcasting system in a country like Canada, geographically situated, and making sure that we survive in a country that gets a lot from American culture.
So algorithms can, in fact, then result in speech censorship. What do you make of that? If algorithms are compelled, it means that people will be able to see certain content and not other content. That means certain content can be put into, some abyss somewhere where folks cannot access it, or they can post it, but then it'll automatically be hidden because of an algorithm. That's censorship. It's keeping some people from being able to say what they would like to say online, and it's keeping others from being able to see what they would like to be able to see or listen to online.
I think you and I think indeed this committee have seen what algorithms can do, and if they are manipulated, how the effect of that manipulation can have on the availability of content. I don't think there's any suggestion that the CRTC is going to suppress algorithms or suppress speech by making sure people are behaving responsibly. Are you suggesting otherwise?
By the CRTC's own omission, they are saying that they do have
Sorry,
the ability...
you said omission or admission.
By their own admission, sorry, thank you. They are saying that they have the ability to compel certain algorithms
Well, the CRTC is a regulatory agency. It has to live up to the standards of their own constituent
And in order
charters.
to achieve the outcomes of Bill C-11, it would then be incumbent upon the CRTC to compel certain algorithms to be enacted.
I think you're reading a lot more into that than what the CRTC is actually doing, which is
Are you able then to
responsible
assure Canadians
regulator.
here today that that will not in fact be the case, that algorithms will not be compelled, that outcomes will not be instituted?
Are you suggesting that any platform can use any algorithm to push its own narrative and content into the Canadian public?
Minister,
and that should be
I'm
unregulated?
just asking for assurance for the Canadian
Well,
people.
I'm asking
if you can in fact assure them that algorithms will not be mandated in such a way that it would control certain things from appearing online and others mandated to appear online.
What I can assure Canadians is that the CRTC can and is expected to do its job, which is to make sure we have a properly regulated
Which
broadcast
they are saying
environment.
that they have the ability to compel algorithms. So, Minister, what you are effectively saying then is that you stand behind that.
I think we agree to disagree on that.
With all due respect, I think that is exactly what you just admitted to. Minister, Bill C-11 came into effect in June of 2024. It's been almost 2 years. What tangible accomplishment has been achieved through Bill C-11 for the Canadian people? It was touted as something that would further our identity and our culture. I'm just curious as to what tangible things it's done to do that.
I think by its passage, it has signaled to the industry, it's signaled to Canadians that we are expecting people to behave in a way, in a free and open society, as they should, and to build up and to make sure we are building a society that allows, in this environment, the media to thrive, justly, as you highlighted, supporting freedom of expression, but in an environment that is fair and accessible to all.
And you would say that that outcome has been achieved?
I don't think we're entirely there, no.
What part of that outcome has been achieved?
I think we passed a law that was very important to make sure that people are doing their jobs and in some cases paying their fair share.
Okay, but in fact, Bill C-11 is caught up in the courts.
Yes.
And actually...
People are allowed to sue in Canada.
Absolutely. And actually really hasn't gone forward in any way. But there's been a whole lot of money spent by the CRTC on Bill C-11 and building a regulatory framework. And so is that really the best use of Canadian dollars when nothing has been accomplished for nearly 2 years?
Well, I certainly wouldn't reduce funds to the justice system simply because people are suing, which is their right. I think...
I'm not asking for money to be reduced to the justice system, Minister. Don't put words in my mouth, please.
No, I didn't. Didn't hear a question from you.
So right now, Canadians are struggling more than ever with affordability. And the changes that were brought in with Bill C-11 and with Bill C-18, the Online News Act, it has increased the cost of subscriptions.
Thank you, Ms.
It
Thomas.
will
That
likely
concludes
further
the time
increase the
for
cost
this
going down
round.
the
We're
road.
going
What
to
do you make of
continue
that?
now. Ms. Thomas, that concludes your time. Thank you. Mr. Letao, on va continuer avec vous pour 6 minutes. Merci.
Mr. Letao, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. So good day, Minister, and good day to your colleagues from the department accompanying you today. Let's come back to the budget, and especially to the investments that have been planned in this budget. Investments which will make it possible to directly support the cultural sector in Quebec. I'll have 2 questions on this topic. Briefly, could you please give us the highlights of the investments into the Quebec cultural sector?
D'abord, grosso modo, comme je l'ai souligné dans...
First of all, as I said in my introductory remarks, about $700 million will be invested into arts and culture. That's $26 million for the National Film Board, $150 million for Telefilm, and $150 million for CBC Radio-Canada, and $58 million for the Canada Media Fund, and $127 million for the Canada Media Fund, which is also important for Quebec, and $58 million for the Music Fund. And this will have impacts for Canadian and Quebec culture, which is extremely important for a sector that is the pride of Quebec and of Canada. Thank you very much, Minister. And since you mentioned CBC Radio-Canada, this seems to be a point of great interest for our friends on the other side. So could you please give your view as to why it is important for the Canadian state to support CBC Radio-Canada? Well, it is the 4th pillar of our democracy, media, a well-funded public broadcaster. It is therefore an important building block into that pillar. And those who carry out research in this sector know that it is not a surprise that when we compare CBC to its peers in other G7 nations, it is underfunded and these entities require good funding so that Canadians can have access to trustworthy news. And also, the entity needs to be independent. That is essential to its credibility. And given the current environment, where there's so much cynicism, if we were to subtract funding, I think that this would further erode public trust and the credibility of this public broadcaster, which again is essential. It's important not only for democracy, but also to have trustworthy news. Mr. Minister, I can personally say that I have always found that CBC Radio-Canada has always done great work. It is a very high-quality news media source. And so, yes, it is very useful and very much necessary for us to continue to invest in that entity. On another topic, something that's very important in my opinion, is that in Quebec we have a number of festivals, events, and cultural gatherings that are very important to the vitality of our economic and cultural identity in Quebec. And of course, we need to support those sectors. So could you please tell us a little about support for this type of initiative and why all of this is such an asset for Quebec culture? That's an extremely relevant question. I did refer to that in my speech. It's not a surprise to anyone in North America. Quebec is the only Francophone nation in the whole of North America, and in order to preserve that culture, it does require support from the federal government, whether it be through investments in arts, culture, or the public broadcaster. I think people know very well that there are multiple levels of government that invest into this, but the federal government has to ensure that this culture is maintained not only in Quebec but across Canada. Madam Chair, how much time? 5 minutes left. Thank you. 5 seconds. What I find very interesting is, as I said earlier, in many cases, these festivals and events, we always see them happening in Quebec City, in Montreal, and so forth. But when it comes to small communities in the rural regions, a small cultural event supported by the federal government can really have a huge impact, because it might be the only activity available in that region. Thank you very much, Mr. Letao. I'm sorry, Minister, there's no time for the answer. We will continue with Mr. Garon for 6 minutes. Thank you. If Mr. Letao has 45 minutes left, he should share that around to the rest of us. So, Mr. Minister, you said earlier, the media are the fourth pillar of our democracy. When it comes to private TV, private media, and local media, are those all part of it, or is it just Radio-Canada that is the fourth pillar of our democracy? No. Actually, I think you already knew the answer to the question, and very clearly the answer is no. I think the question that you're going to ask me is, what is the role of the state to support it? So $150 million for CBC Radio-Canada for this year. You know that as Quebecers, we're not against that. But television is going through a crisis. What do you have laid out in the budget for that, for the other entities that make up that fourth pillar? Well, I asked myself the question, what is the role of the state in supporting these organizations? We support them through numerous tax credits, but what is new in the budget? What are the new measures? Well, you saw what I already laid out, And I know that you might hold it against me that there was nothing for it. No, I won't hold it against you. So the support that was there for the media was support for CBC Radio-Canada. And was that a number that CBC asked the government, or did the government come up with it? I'm not aware of that. You're not aware? So the Minister of Heritage doesn't know. I wasn't the Minister of Heritage at that time of the election, as you know. Okay, excellent. So we see that there's not much earmarked for those other entities. We want to reiterate that all of the media ecosystem is important and makes up that fourth pillar. And yes, they have tax credits. So the goal really is to support communities through these proposals that we made. That's why we made the proposals that we did. And we think that funding is deserved by the other entities that make up that fourth pillar. I would also like to talk to you about living arts. There's a lot of money for culture. Your predecessor said it, and we applauded that. But the Canada Arts Council asked for $140 million, which was supported by the entire industry. So it's a $6 million budget that was given to them. They asked for 140 and you gave them $6 million. You don't know what CBC even asked for, and you gave them 150 million. So can you tell us how that is decided? It's not binary the way that you described it. And secondly, when it comes to the budget, especially when it comes to an election period, there is a decision-making process and priorities that are defined. And that led you to, because I would say that the Canada Arts Council is very important to properly fund. So you say there's a process that led to 150 million being asked for. Well, we did give several $million to the Arts Council. That's not nothing. So you gave 150 million to CBC. How do you get from a requested amount of 140 million to what they got? And we know that you gave $150 million to CBC in the middle of an election period. So tell me more about this process that leads to that calculation. It wasn't a surprise that CBC needed funding. We carried out an in-depth analysis to try and see what was requested. CBC is independent. I would like to talk to you about Ticketmaster Live Nation. This is under your file. I think it's an important one. So in 2010, those two companies came together, and the U.S. Congress currently is looking into an antitrust case against this conglomerate. Since 2019, it's like a cartel that controls about 40% of the market shares, 49-50% even. I'd like to know what you think of that issue, and if you, together with the industry department, have contacted the Competition Bureau to see what would happen here in Canada. I won't be able to speak on behalf of the industry department, but no, I did not contact the competition office. I do find it concerning. Any type of monopoly in the country worries me. When we talk about Eventco and Live Nation, Eventco, which produces a number of festivals, we have to ask ourselves about the way they behave, of course. I don't think anyone is going to. The interpreter notes that both speakers are speaking at once. I'm not going to debate you on that. Do I have 20 seconds left, Madam Chair? I'm not telling you that you haven't done anything. I'm just telling you that this is a file that's concerning to me, given the file that I'm responsible for, and I was curious to know if it had become a bigger issue than just for the industry department. And since you're new in your role, I thought it would be worthwhile to ask you the question. And if there are any developments, I think it would be very worthwhile to share that with the committee. Thank you very much, Mr. Garon. There's no time for an answer, Minister, but we will continue.
For 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. You are the Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture. Do you believe that religion is an integral part of Canadian culture and identity?
Absolutely.
So you obviously know where this is going. On October 30th, when you were the chair of the Justice Committee, you spoke about how there is, quote, clear hatred in some verses of the Bible and Torah, and that prosecutors should be able to have the discretion to lay charges if someone invokes a particular scripture that you find objectionable. So how are you standing up for the various diverse communities, faith communities in particular, that you extolled in your opening statement, when you believe that sincerely held religious beliefs should attract prosecution?
I believe anyone should be able to freely read the Bible, Torah, Quran, or any religious scripture. It's a guarantee in the Charter that I will defend as well as you will.
Unless it's a verse that you
Long.
don't like.
What I said, and you were there, no, I'm glad to answer that. Ken.
Mr. McDonald?
This has nothing to do with the budget or the BIA Act. He's line of question.
Thank you.
It
Yeah.
stems from comments made in his opening statement, Madam Chair.
Excuse me. Yeah, I didn't recognize you, Mr. Lawton. Mr. McDonald, it's not a point of order. Thank you very much, Mr. Lawton. You can continue to have the floor, but I would ask that you be recognized before you take it. Thank you.
I think that I don't think religious scripture should be used as a defense for a hate crime. If someone publicly says that they want to kill all the gays and that they are relying on a passage in Leviticus, they should be prosecuted. Hard stop. And I'm a Christian. I believe firmly that that person should be prosecuted.
And that would not be a good faith usage of Scripture.
That's your debate, but sometimes prosecutors may be prevented from laying charges because there's some hesitation. I think it needs to be clear in the law, and I think you would agree with it, and any reasonable person would as well.
You mentioned back in December, I think if you talk to people of faith and even religious leaders, they would see that this is really something that makes sense regarding removing those religious speech protections from the criminal code. I have spoken to people of faith and religious leaders, and Bill C-9 and the removal of the religious defense has been denounced by the Primate of the Anglican Church of Canada, the United Church of Canada, the National Council of Canadian Muslims, the Rabbinical Council of Toronto, the Conference of Canadian Catholic Bishops, the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada. Why do you believe that you know more than these faith groups about religious freedom and protections for religion in Canada?
As a Protestant, I rely on my relationship with Jesus and my reading of the Bible. I believe ministers can be guides. So I think I stand on an equal footing. I think you would agree with me with that. But if you really want to protect religious institutions, you will talk to Pierre Poilievre, Parliament's only temporary foreign worker, and have him pass C-9 to protect religious institutions.
Your government has signaled that the Online Harms Act, which has been twice tabled and twice not passed, will be returning. This is a bill that, among other things, would, in its previous incarnations, reinstitute Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act, which allows for the Human Rights Code to go after what the government deems online hate speech. Will that be a part of the forthcoming Online Harms Act?
Look, if you want my opinion on it.
Well, I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm asking for your insight as the minister.
Well, I'm not going to speak about deliberations that are in front of Cabinet. If you want my opinion, there are issues in and around freedom of expression about any act that would be presented into Parliament to keep Canadians and particularly children safe from online harms. And I don't think it's necessary to have a private recourse regime under the Canadian Human Rights Act.
We have a bill that's before this House of Commons already from Michelle Rempel-Garner, I believe C-216. I might be wrong about the number, but it creates a duty of care for tech companies to deal with very legitimate online harms against children, against sexual victims. Why not support that?
I'm not unsupportive of it, frankly. I spoke to your colleague, Ms. Thomas, recently about that. I haven't yet, in fairness, to speak to Ms. Rempel about it. I think the motive behind it and the purpose behind it is laudable. I think in the articulation of it, it properly should be introduced by the government and supported by one, but willing to work with her on the details.
Will the forthcoming Online Harms Act be a bill that you put forward, or will it be a justice bill?
It's TBD.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton. We will now continue with Mr. McDonald for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister, other witnesses. Minister Miller, Prince Edward Island's cultural identity is deeply rooted in its Acadian heritage, and it's reflected in many of the family names around my living area, names like Arsenault and Gallant and Paquette and Chasson. And it represents generations of language, arts, and culture throughout Prince Edward Island and indeed Atlantic Canada. This heritage is celebrated every year through National Acadian Day, and in this budget we did commit funds to continue funding that celebration. Can you just elaborate on what investments the federal government has made in budget 2025 so that Acadian and Francophone families and communities across Prince Edward Island and Atlantic Canada can continue to see these tangible benefits?
I think it's a really important question, Ken. I perhaps didn't have much time in answering Mr. Latau's question, but there are events across Canada that really merit and deserve support from the Canadian government, and often sometimes we're there with the provinces, and sometimes we are not. This budget round, we had $4 million going into the Fête Nationale des Acadiens et des Acadiennes. It's so important. I have Acadian blood in my own veins, so I'm proud to support that as well. But it's so important for the Acadian nation to make sure that we are supporting them with the appropriate funds to celebrate their day. If anyone hasn't seen the Tête à Marre, I would encourage them to go do it. It's not every Acadian town that does that, but it's neat to go see. And it's, again, part of, it's a painful part of our history, but it's a shared history, and it's one that we have to continue to support. So those millions of dollars will go to some really cool events in the middle of the summer.
Thank you, Minister. Also in PEI, we have the Confederation Center of the Arts, which was opened in 1964. And it's a historic performing arts facility that gives many visitors an opportunity to see island culture. I think over 200,000 people a year visit there. 150,000 are attending performances, exhibits, and educational programs just last year. So, Minister, we see a transformation taking place there at the Confederation Center of the Arts. There's a construction of a new rehearsal hall. So with these cultural buildings like these that inspire Canadians, what's in budget 2025 to continue the operation of these facilities and promote culture and events in Atlantic Canada?
I think anytime we're promoting the birthplace of Confederation, we're doing a good thing. As you mentioned, and you were modest enough not to mention the amounts, but I'm not that modest, but I think putting over $5 million into renovations that not only draw Canadians, and with more and more Canadians traveling within Canada, certainly we'll see more Canadians, but really international travel for Charlottetown to shine and show on the Canadian and the world stage our beautiful shared history. So it's something that I don't think anyone should vote against, because it is so critical to highlighting who we are as a country and our history, and again, the birthplace of Confederation.
Thank you, Minister. And then further along, we talk in the budget about the $150 million for CBC Radio Canada, on top of the $42 million that was already topped up. In our region, we depend a lot in smaller communities for that public funding for CBC, because it may be the only shop in town that's delivering news, real news in my opinion, and playing local music, local talent. Can you speak further on the importance of providing that funding for those smaller communities that depend on it?
Yeah, and I have these discussions in the context of even modernizing CBC and RADCAN's mandate. What we often hear from regions is, yes, that heat map of where CBC RADCAN penetrates is not perfect, but in some communities that is perhaps the only resource to get news. Let's not get into whether to other unreliable news that are penetrating, but it is important, and I think it is to the colleagues that we're talking about, the fourth pillar of our democracy, so critical, more than just news, making sure that people are being able to hear themselves in their accents and languages, that they see when they talk to their family or
Thank
go to
you,
the store.
Minister.
But
Thank
also
you, Mr.
getting
McDonald.
getting
We're gonna
fair
have
news
to
in
end it
remote
there.
areas.
We'll continue with Monsieur Garon pour 2 minutes et demie. Merci.
Mr. Garon for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, Bill C-15 includes a provision, and you probably know that libraries and municipalities in Quebec are in particular concerned about this because they wouldn't be able to. Rather, there's an exception for libraries. The Quebec Library Network has been looking into this, and they do have a preferential rate. And this allows them to be able to move books around in the regions. We have an association of people with visual disabilities. And this exception is very important for them. The Minister of Finance was not aware of it when I spoke with him. Are you concerned by this at all, and would you be open to us working together on amendments to make sure that this preferential rate for libraries can be maintained? Well, I admit you're taking me by surprise, but I can see the issue that you're talking about. So let's come back to television. Mr. McDonald almost just told us that, well, for the first year in science and economics, we're teachers, and we teach them that information is something that is news is expensive to produce. And when it comes to social media, they can publish just as much as television can. And private television is important. And we believe that it's the role of the state to fund those. So what would you say is the state's role in funding private television? In your opinion? We could talk about this all day long. I would hope not. Well, for one, briefly, please. There is a role for the CRTC that is played out, and we know that in the current context, those organizations do need support. I'm sorry, Minister. We'll come back to you next time. We're now going to continue with Mr. Lefebvre for 5 minutes. I'm going to share my time with my colleagues who will take the floor. Please.
Minister, what do you believe fundamentally the role of CBC is?
I think, and even if you were to consider one of the great philosophers of the conservative movement, in Burke, that it, as I mentioned earlier, is a fourth pillar of democracy. So keeping me, you accountable to the public by making sure there is reliable information that people can have and consume as they get their information about whatever they want, but most importantly, judge and elect people like me and you to this place.
Does a television show about a tomato that speaks to children about colonialism fit that?
I don't know. What do you think?
I would say that's not something that government needs to subsidize. There have also been, just to use a recent example, a CBC News story called "I Felt People Would Judge Me for Getting Botox, Then I Realized I Was Judging Myself." I haven't read that. It may or may not be interesting, but is this vital to the Canadian identity and cultural fabric that we must pay for this?
Well, I think you expect your public broadcaster to have shows that are relevant to the public. It doesn't have to be necessarily relevant to you or me. And as an important aspect of that, I shouldn't be telling them what to do. I can have my view on it, but again, I shouldn't be telling them what to do.
If CBC were not there, is the belief that there would be no one else to broadcast the Olympics? Something that countries around the world or broadcasters around the world spend huge amounts of money for the rights to do. Why is a state broadcaster needed to galvanize what could be a moneymaker for private media companies?
You could probably debate about it, but I just think it makes sense. There could be, but also the CBC does a pretty good job of it. And why wouldn't it do?
Do you believe CBC's role should be to fill gaps that otherwise no one else would fill, or is it to, do something, even if it means competing with private players in the market?
I think definitely it's a lot of the former and perhaps some of the latter. We talked with my colleague Ken McDonald about getting into remote regions. I think CBC has a duty to get that information into remote regions where it isn't economically viable to do so. So absolutely. Maintaining the vitality of our official languages, especially in francophone communities outside Quebec, is key, given the state of the language in those communities.
I don't know if the Tomato spoke about colonialism in both official languages or not.
Maybe not, but I'm sure it did a great job of it.
Okay. I yield to Ms. Thomas.
Thank you. Minister, on those lines, your government has committed another $150 million to the CBC. There was already $1.4 billion that was committed. This is at a time when Canadians are struggling with affordability. They are the taxpayer. They are the ones that are ultimately paying for that increase that is going to the CBC. Meanwhile, the CBC viewership is down, trust is down. Canadians just aren't there with you, Minister, and yet they're expected to foot the bill. So I'm curious on their behalf, what accountability measures are being used to determine that this is in fact a wise use of dollars?
Well, I think when you look at the numbers, and the numbers are revealing, Ms. Thomas, the CBC per capita is not as well funded as any comparator country. Only under us are the US, and we're pretty close to one other country. So there's general consensus that a robust publicly funded national broadcaster is important to democracies like ours. Do they get everything right? I think certainly the answer is no, but it is important for them to be there to do exactly what they are supposed to do, which is to inform the public, for example, on issues of affordability. So you perhaps, and your party has been quite open about defunding the CBC, but I think that would undermine the trust of Canadians that are relying on information from reliable providers to make those decisions as to who to vote for. And they have been remarkably good at getting that information out, in my view.
If I may, the question was around accountability, but rather than offering any metrics that you as a government are using to determine the success of the CBC and whether or not more money should be spent there, the only thing you've mentioned is comparing to other countries and what they're spending. So you're more interested in keeping up with others, the Joneses, if you will, than you are with holding the broadcaster accountable for actually producing what Canadians rely on. Viewership is down, trust is down. Canadians are not buying into this. But you're insisting that we need to spend more money because other countries are doing it. Why is that your metric? Why are you not holding the CBC
Thank you,
to
Ms.
greater
Thomas.
account?
That concludes the time for this round. We'll continue with Mr. Sawatsky for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Minister, and to everyone for coming today. And it was so great to see you in British Columbia. The Minister, the Fraser Mills sawmill was built on the banks of the Fraser River, and it recruited 100 French Canadians as workers for the area. So these families were founded, the workers themselves founded the French-speaking village of Mayaldeville, which is a part of my riding, and that became one of the largest French-speaking communities west of the Rockies in the 20th century. So today, Mayaldeville is an important historic site for the Franco-Colombian community, and there's also some local organizations such as the Société Francophone de Mayaldeville that are doing important work to preserve the French language there. Now, of course, being the minister responsible for official languages, the protection and support of the French language is one of your responsibilities. So could you explain what's included in Budget 2025 to ensure that we're supporting Canadian French language and content both at home and abroad?
And as I mentioned to your colleague, Mr. Letao, there are, the supports that we've talked about at some length now for CBC, Radio-Canada, for Telefilm, for the Office National du Film. Those are really important budgetary measures in the context of a budget that had a rationalization aspect to it. As we looked at making some difficult choices as to what we were prioritizing, I think prioritizing institutions that make us and continue to make us proud of our Canadian national identity, including the promotion of our official languages across Canada, is key, and including into penetrating into small communities like the one you mentioned. I know you have made significant efforts to learn French yourself. I think that is laudable. There need to be more opportunities in that respect. We have been signing bilateral agreements with provinces, over $1 billion for education agreements for second language learning. More often than not, that is French, as well as the action plan that saw significant investments into the French language across Canada, including in Quebec.
Thank you very much, Minister. On a separate note, I saw an article where you mentioned the show Heated Rivalry as a Canadian content triumph. It just happens to be the case that Hudson Williams also worked in my riding of New Westminster, Burnaby, Mayoardville at the old spaghetti factory, which was just behind my old constituency office. So I know that federal funding has helped this show. Would you like to explain or provide some examples about how federal funding has enabled Canadian stories to reach new audiences at home and abroad?
Yeah, look, this has been, I don't think that's an exception. Hopefully it would be a rule, seeing what Heated Rivalry is doing. It would not exist if the federal government had not invested about $4 million into the programming. That's a quarter of the funding, and you fold in some of the tax credits. That show was pitched to American producers. They passed for a variety of reasons, even though they liked it, because people were not willing to trust instinct and embrace the risk. And with the funds that were provided by the Canadian government, that show now is breaking all sorts of records and defying stereotypes in society, and even in countries where views on the gay community and the LGBT rights are not what they are here in Canada. So it's a great show and all that, but there's also spurring a lot of discussions, especially for young kids in locker rooms in a toxic environment, questioning who they are, and if they feel inspired by that, that's cool too.
Absolutely. It was a funny moment to see the Prime Minister say, "Do the leg thing." That was quite a moment. So giving Canadian children the opportunity to explore this beautiful country is definitely an important role for the government. So what actions is the government taking to safeguard Canadian identity while promoting our culture through initiatives like the Canada Strong Pass?
Yeah, that's a really cool pass, and perhaps people would say, well, why are we supporting museums in that way, and shouldn't we be doing something else? But museums are a great place for kids to discover in a healthy way a whole ton of things, whether it's dinosaurs in Toronto or airplanes right here. There's cool things to discover, and in this, I think if the numbers are right, 500,000 kids saw or were visited museums and benefited from the Canada Strong Pass that we are going to extend in 2026. Over the Christmas period, we saw an uptick. We don't have the numbers of that, but clearly we're seeing more kids going there.
We're going to
and
have to
it's not just
conclude
limited to
this
kids; it's for all
round here.
Canadians.
I have to say, a Canadian show must have broken the cultural sound barrier when Heated Rivalry gets brought up in Parliament at the Finance Committee. And so on that, Ms. Kobina, we're going to turn to you for 5 minutes.
Okay. Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you for joining us, Minister. I think this is the first time I actually get to ask some questions. My first question to you, though, is why do you need the power to exempt any person or corporation from almost any federal law except for the criminal code to do your job?
Don't necessarily. It's probably a useful tool to have. I think those clauses that do find their way into legislation are often interpreted with a standard of reasonableness, but to be quite clear, we don't necessarily need them, but they are a useful tool to have.
Okay, so you don't need it. Would you be open to removing it then from this bill?
From C-15?
Yep.
No.
Why not?
Well, it's not my job to remove it, but it's a useful tool to have in the context, particularly if we're trying to get things done in a rapid fashion.
Well, the concern is that you are able to make decisions on your own, based on your prerogative, behind closed doors with no accountability to Parliament or to Canadians. And so in your remarks, you talked about protecting what makes Canada unique, being a democracy, that this clause is undemocratic. So why would you like to keep it?
Sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Why would you like to keep the clause if it is undemocratic? You can exempt any company or entity or individual, from almost any federal law except for the criminal code on your own, with no public disclosure behind closed doors?
Well, like I said, it's not an indispensable tool. It's a helpful tool to have. These clauses are often interpreted by courts on a standard of reasonableness in the context. And in the context that we are seeing with things moving very rapidly, I think it is important for us to be able to have some nimbleness.
But if there is no accountability to the public and you are not actually, you don't have to disclose what conflict of interest act was violated or anything like that, then I don't think that's in the best interest of the country.
Well, first, this is a bill on which members will be asked to vote. It is also one where my belief is to be able to use that tool is one that should be used sparingly, but again, useful to have in the context.
But why should one individual minister, be allowed to bypass 150 years of Canadian law and exempt a person or company of their choosing?
Look, that may be your view, but I don't think that is what's happening.
Well, that's how it's written.
It doesn't say people are being exempted from 150 years of law.
It says from any federal law except the criminal code.
Right. There's no mention of years or...
It's any federal law except
Sure.
for the criminal. So it's any federal law that has been passed over the last 150 years.
Right. I'm not going to parse this out with you.
So just to be clear, you don't need it to do your job, but you want to keep it nonetheless.
I think it's helpful to have.
Do you see the potential of abuse, though, in that companies or people will have to lobby you personally and not care about the law itself?
No one's asked me to overturn any laws.
You would have the ability to.
In some contexts, perhaps, but again, this is something that would have to be used very judiciously.
How could you possibly think that this would not undermine the trust in our democracy then?
I think Canadians expect us to act reasonably. I think Canadians expect us to be judicious in our decision making. Passing a law like C-15, which all members will have the opportunity to vote on, is something that is inherently accountable in and of itself.
Well, it has this particular clause that is very problematic. It is all over the news. I have a letter with 43 organizations asking for you to strike it because of the potential of abuse, but you still want to keep it.
I think I've answered that question about 3 times now.
I just don't find it reasonable for you to have the powers of a king, essentially.
Certainly don't have the powers of a king.
If you are allowed to exempt any entity from any federal law, it is like the powers of a king.
Is that a statement or a question?
Well, it's a fact.
Thank you, Ms. Covina. That concludes the time for this round. We will continue with Mr. Fragiscatos for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister and officials, for being here. Mr. Miller, I want to begin. We heard some comments about the public broadcaster. If you check them to their logical conclusion, it could be argued that colleagues are arguing ultimately for a system where the government is deciding what's broadcast and what is not by the public broadcaster. Can you just reiterate the importance of an independent public broadcaster for a democracy like Canada?
Yeah, look, if it's critical. The broadcasting, the CBC empowering legislative document goes back 90 years. It has been integral to building up and bolstering the democracy that we have today. The CBC, Radio-Canada, has been criticized from its inception. There's books by Pierre Burton on this. It's not an institution that should lack scrutiny, but it certainly needs independence. And when I say independence, it doesn't mean that they are unaccountable. Ultimately, CBC is accountable to the legislation that creates it, but also to the public. Otherwise, the public loses trust. And we've seen the loss of trust in the last few years for a variety of reasons. The prevalent media environment with online platforms, a lot of misinformation, disinformation spreading around. And as a beacon of light in that, sometimes vomitorium, you need an independent broadcaster that has the resources, often supported by the state, without the influence of the state. So independence of the CEO, of the board, of the editorial boards in the context of our bilingual country, access to content in English and French. And those are, and it should never be understated, a key pillar in keeping me and you accountable, but also, members of the opposition. And so key to that is making sure that information is honest, truthful, with a process that ensures that independence, where journalists can ask me the same difficult questions that they ask the opposition.
Thank you very much. I also want to ask you a question about something different now, multiculturalism in Canada and its future. You're the minister responsible for introducing a really important set of reforms that have helped to begun to restore sustainability in the immigration system, but still we do see a narrative on immigration in Canada and other democracies, of course. What future do you see for multiculturalism in this country? How will you be moving forward in terms of continuing to underline the importance of that kind of vision for a multicultural, multi-faith democracy as is Canada, considering the prevalence of current narratives around it?
Hopefully I won't be alone in it, but as the minister in charge of the multiculturalism law, to make sure that the principles that underpin it are being maintained in the context of the country that we are, bilingual for a country that's been built on immigration other than Indigenous peoples. It's no secret to anyone that there is large anti-immigrant sentiment. When we see that eating away at the public narrative in a toxic way, it eats away at another fundamental pillar of our democracy, which is pluralism, that multiculturalism underpins. People do need to integrate to Canada in a democracy and subscribe and practice our values, one of them being our respect of the Charter of Rights and Freedom. And key to this is making sure that we continue the investments in highlighting not only who we are as country, first and foremost Canadians, but at times united by our differences. And that sometimes requires funds that we come here and humbly ask for, but it also requires engagement from all Canadians and not just elected officials to realize that we are better because we have the ability to have discussions about our differences, but realize at the end of the day that we're all Canadians and proud of it.
Thank you very much. I have 40 seconds left. The people back home in London wouldn't be happy if I didn't ask a question on the following. The film sector and its future. There's a lot of excitement around the city. We've had a few films shot in London, a few TV shows. What would you advise medium-sized communities like London in terms of what they can do to better position themselves in terms of that kind of vision for the future? It's been an emerging area in our economy in some ways.
Very brief response, please.
Well, get out and go to London. It's a lovely place. I've been there myself, but you see a lot of films being filmed around the country, and we need to keep that up. That reality is under threat in some very asymmetrical discussions with our partner to the south of us, but we need to stay on top of that.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Fragiscados. Et on va conclure cette heure avec Monsieur Garon.
And we will conclude this hour with 2.5 minutes to Mr. Garon. Thank you, Chair. Minister, you seem very interested in the role of the state in TV broadcasting. I'd like to know your take. Is it the state's role to broadcast ads on public TV? For example, deodorant ads, potato chip ads during the election period. Is that the role of the state, in your opinion? It seems like you know a bit about this. Well, the role of the state is to fund a public broadcaster. And then if that broadcaster afterwards generates ad revenue for itself, well, it's interesting what you say. You're saying that it's secondary the fact that there are billions of dollars that already go to CBC, that you add $150 million on top of that. Ms. Saint-Onge was your predecessor. I don't think that she thought that this was secondary. On this file, I believe that she thought that it was important to regulate that policy at CBC. You think that that's secondary? No, but I think that the state doesn't have that kind of direct influence to tell CBC what to do and not to do. So you give them the funding. You could say nobody likes ads, put fewer ads. We're giving you $150 million extra. I think that if CBC includes ads in its programming, I don't think it's serious. Well, if it's not that serious, this is taxpayer money. Why didn't you say we're going to give you $150 million in funding and you're going to stop playing ads? Nobody likes ads anyway. I think that would have been possible. I don't think that nobody likes ads. Some of them I don't like, but, well, we can have a referendum on that topic. Well, the Bloc loves its referendums. And we're going to end on that note. Thank you very much, Mr. Garon. And on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank the minister and the public servants who are here accompanying him. We will now take a brief break in order to prepare for the next hour of our committee meeting. Thank you.